All right. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello to the world. We have guests from different continents, different parts of the world, and myself, I'm Abdul Samad Khan. I welcome you to this Act Global. Right now, it's 10 p.m. with me in Islamabad, and I've got my first guest, Jannette, who joined us right now from United States. So, Jannette, welcome to Act Global.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So what's time right now? It's with you.
It's noon here. Yeah,
It's
it's
noon,
noon.
right?
It's
So
lunchtime. Yeah,
lunchtime. Sorry, we forced you to skip your lunch.
no problem.
Well, thank you very much. And our next guest, this wonderful lady from UK, Zamzam, she will be joining us very soon, hopefully, in this conversation. Just to give some context about this session, this ACT Global is basically a cup of tea. So it's an acronym which stands for a cup of tea. And at Youth Impact, we have 11 different chapters of Youth Impact alumni in different cities of Pakistan. And before COVID, we used to have a monthly reunion of alumni in all these different chapters. And this reunion used to be called as ACT, a cup of tea. So literally, they used to have a cup of tea. And the beauty of this virtual session is that, our guests and our moderators have a choice that they can have tea or coffee or whatever they want to have at their own choice at their own pace. So you're not forced to drink Pakistani spice chai only. So yeah, using this time, I would request my first guest, Janet, to spend a few minutes to introduce our audience about who she is, what does she do in terms of your personal, your professional, impact. So, Janet, over to you.
Okay, so my name is Jannette Taylor. I am originally from Omaha, Nebraska, which is right in the heartland of America. We're right in the center. Um,
Wow.
my Most of my life, I've lived in Omaha and I've worked in nonprofit. Being a Black person in America, you see a lot of injustices and you experience a lot of injustice, be it for yourself, family members, what have you. So I've always been involved in community activism and just projects and programs that make the world a better place. I'm always up for a protest, and I can always find a reason to support a righteous cause. So we are talking about Black Lives Matter today, and obviously, being a Black person in America, this is something that is extremely important to me. And I know we're going to get into that in a second. But initially, when Black Lives Matter started, myself and others joined that movement because we saw ourselves reflected in the people who were being murdered. So me personally, I have 2 master's degrees. I went to law school. I didn't finish my law degree, but I went to law school. And I've just done a lot of work in government and in nonprofit. I
Yeah.
own my own business, and I basically help organizations and CEOs thrive doing other community work and things out in the world. So, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you very much. And I can see a lot of diverse and very rich experience you are carrying with yourself.
Yeah.
And this is kind of strange that still in 21st century, with all that technological and advancements, still we see that issues like racism, discrimination, xenophobia, they still degrade human life, human value, human dignity. So, what do you think in general? Why still, as a human being, with so much education, so much technology, why still we are stuck with these basic issues?
So I will speak to what's happening here in the United States. So in the United States, it's systemic oppression. Um,
Yeah.
and people are like, the system's failing us. It's not failing us. It was designed this way. So since the beginning of time, there was slavery. And it essentially was human trafficking. They kidnapped people and brought them to this country, enslaved them, had them build this country, and held them
Mhm.
in bondage for centuries. And once the 13th Amendment, we it abolished slavery. It didn't really abolish slavery. It just changed. So instead of having people in a plantation, we now have people in prison. So
Uh-huh.
those black and brown bodies who were on the slave field are now being held in prisons, and they're still being exploited for work. And the system was designed that way. America is a capitalist. It's a capitalist society, and so it's all about money. You've experienced that with your visit to the U.S., where you can see these beautiful buildings, and then you see homeless people on the street. That's essentially what America is.
Exactly. I mean, this is sorry to interrupt, but this is exactly what I had experienced. We were walking on a street in Denver, and I saw this skyscraper, huge building, like 60, 80 different stories, and on the ground we saw these homeless people sleeping on the street. So I was a bit critical on this whole, kind of. Conflict or discrimination or whatever you say, that why we need these many expensive buildings, while we can't provide shelter to our poor people, our poor communities. So that's where I was a bit shocked on this side of American society. But I don't know how different it is from the perspective of other countries. So do you have any global exposure to these issues like racism? Because we see a lot of
Right.
protests going around the world these days.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I've traveled around the world. I've, been to Argentina, I've been to Germany, I've been to France, I've been to, Belgium, all these different places, Amsterdam. Um,
Right.
what I've experienced when I'm in Europe is that if people believe that I am African, like from an African nation, they treat me poorly. It's xenophobia. They treat me poorly. But when they find out I'm an American, I'm treated better than the African people who are in those countries. And maybe Zamzam can talk about that when she joins us. But I think racism and that xenophobia kind of permeates the world. And it's just going to take a new way of thinking for all of us. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Interesting. Um, I'm based in Islamabad, Pakistan. So generally, I call that we are kind of a unipolar society, especially when I compare with other nations, other countries, where we see a lot of colors, a lot of religions, a lot of ethnic or geographical backgrounds. They live and coexist together. In that context, uh, generally, as a 93% majority Muslim country, with almost same skin color and same language. So that's where we tell the young people in Pakistan that that's where we need to get an exposure to diversity and the differences, because if we can't teach our young people, young kids, to interact with different people with different languages, different cultures, different religions, different colors, I mean, we can't understand or respect that element. So I have seen this element a lot in American society. I mean, the exposure to diversity, and that's where still makes me concerned that a society where welcome Zamzam. So
Zamzam.
managed to join us. Yeah. So I'm just going to conclude my comment, and then we'll request Zamzam to give us a brief introduction about herself as well. So, Jannette, addressing to you this question or concern, that as I say, that in comparison with Pakistan, United States is more diverse and more inclusive. So still, when we see these kind of issues raising in that part of the world, that makes us concerned that we also see these developed nations as very rich, economically empowered. So what makes people to come on the street? I mean, they have everything, because we watch in Hollywood movies and we see that these people have beautiful cars, nice buildings, and wonderful lifestyle. So they've got everything on earth, but still we see the sufferings, we see the problems. So can you educate these Pakistani young people, especially, that what is the phenomenon, what's the background?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's a system of oppression. It's a capitalist society. So there are the upper echelon of folks, and then there are the people at the bottom. So the people driving the nice cars are the families that have had money for centuries, right? They have what we call old money. The people who are struggling on the streets are the marginalized people, who are usually Black and brown people. They're Black people, they're Hispanic people. or they're immigrants who've come to this country as refugees. That, I think, exists everywhere. It's sort of like a caste system here in the US. No one calls it that, but essentially that's what it is. And that's why and the US doesn't project itself, like they're not going to show you all these homeless people. They're not going to show you all the children who can't eat because there's food insecurity. They'll show you the nice cars and the things that you see in Hollywood, which isn't reflective of what you actually saw when you were here visiting in the US. So it's a capitalist society, and it's essentially a caste system still. So
right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we'll continue your conversation with Jannette, and let's focus on Zamzam. She's this wonderful lady I met a few years back in Malaysia. We were together in the same panel. And Zamzam, good to see you after a few years. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. Good to see you too.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for joining. And would you mind introducing yourself? Take some minutes, and our audience need to know a little bit more about you.
Absolutely, sure. So, I mean, as you've said, my name is Zamzam Ibrahim. I guess for the last few years have been a climate activist, a social activist, raising awareness and essentially lobbying government on policy change in any way of tackling any form of like racial discrimination or any injustices that exist in our society. So I've been involved in a wide range of work, but I've also recently been the president and vice president for the National Union of Students, which is the representative body of all students studying in the United Kingdom across England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. And I've been the sole representative to, I guess, pass policy and in decisions that they make, in decisions that affect students. So that's some of the work that I've been involved with.
Interesting. That's wonderful. So I'm just going to revert back to what you said, because for Pakistani audience, you were a bit fast when you said that, you were the president of National Union for Students.
National Union of Students.
Okay. And what does that mean? What does that union does?
So the National Union of Students, so in the UK, we have, through the Education Act, we have student unions that exist in every university and every college. And so that's a body that represents students' interest on campus level. And the National Union of Students has a membership of all these student unions across the country. And I am so I was actually a vice president and a president at my students' union when I studied in Manchester, and now was elected to become and represent students on a national scale. And so what we do is we collate the conversations that are happening and the work that's happening locally on campuses. So what universities are facing, the issues that students are facing, and we highlight those on a national scale to the government, and we work internationally with national unions across the UK, across the globe. Sorry. So so essentially we're a union for students.
Okay, interesting. Zamzam, I'll continue my conversation with you. We just had some chat with Jannette talking about the dynamics about racism and xenophobia, especially in the context of United States. So UK is another leading nation in the world. So what's your experience about these issues in UK in general? Because we can talk specific later on, but what do you think? How on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is like a society which is too much into racism, and 1 is like it's very inclusive. So what do you think? Where do that society stands at the moment?
I mean, I think the UK specifically has what I call systemic racism, and that being racism is quite literally embedded in everything, in our institutions, in our government, in our legislation, so in everything that we see around ourselves. Racism is somewhat covert, but most definitely apparent and most definitely there. And so I think one of the things that the difference that I always like to draw between like the racism that you see in the global South, for example, and that you see in the UK, is that the UK has a rich, like the UK, like America, is actually built on the oppression of people of color. It's built on it's built on slave labor, and the UK, especially the British Empire, has been so brilliant at, like I made a joke about this on a panel the other day, being the Britain's best kept secret is the British Empire, and the reality is that that other countries learn more about the British Empire than we do in our education system. It's taught to us in a way where the British went around and they liberated the rest of the world, and they gave them resources and they supported them, rather than the reality. What they did was strip them of their resources, and so actually, like, that history is very much the reason as to why we call the UK now a successful society. It's because it continues till this day to live off the foundations that were built by Black and brown people. And like, even wider than that, I think when we talk about like our education systems, when we talk about systems of like our government, for example, the way in which those are set up, those have always been set up to oppress people of color. And the reason for that is that sorry, there's like a ice cream truck in the background. But like, the reality is, like, our education system, our parliamentary system was never set up for a Black or brown person to ever take office. And so it isn't a surprise when they go through those systems that they face huge waves of racism, of discrimination, and of issues. And so, I mean, like Jannette said, like, it is a capitalist system that is the way it's set up, and a capitalist system to its root means that for a capitalist system to exist, people have to there has to be people that are oppressed. That's the only way a capitalist system succeeds and struggles. And so I think that the links behind the way in which we see racism and how it plays out across the world is very much I guess it's a factor that kind of runs through it all, and that's capitalism.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and maybe in this conversation today we can't address, or we can't come up with an alternative to capitalism. But let's focus on our topic, our theme today. So, Jannette, in our offline conversation, you were talking about how you started being part of this Black Lives Matter movement. So, tell us, our audience, about what is this movement? Where did it start exactly, and what is the purpose and what's the objective behind this movement?
Right. So in the U.S., Black Lives Matter started after Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman.
And which year was that?
I'm sorry?
Which year was that?
In 2013. And so the challenge was that you have this young kid who was murdered by this man who basically had a proximity to whiteness. He murdered him because he felt like he didn't belong in the neighborhood. And for us, for Black people in America, we are so used to seeing things like that happen. It was overwhelming and we were tired of it. And so Black Lives Matter emerged in 2013 as a response to Trayvon Martin not only being murdered, but for George Zimmerman being acquitted, and basically not being held accountable for taking another Black life. So you saw that happen with Black Lives Matter as it emerged from Trayvon Martin. And currently what you're seeing is the murder of George Floyd. You're seeing all these protests because, again, Black people are tired. We have been tired. And it takes protests to affect change. And so now you're seeing the whole Black Lives Matter emerging again in the US, where there are many, many voices supporting it. And it's because you see on video another Black body being taken. And we're tired of it. So that's where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this video about Floyd, all over social media, even all the memes and all the posts by people around the world, even in other part of the world, in Pakistan, it made us concerned that, how someone can be so brutal. And that's the reason that why we are having this conversation today, to educate the people in our part of the world that, what kind of issues are happening and what are the challenges being faced by humanity. So Zamzam, targeting or addressing to you as a young Muslim Black woman. I mean, these are three different levels. At your personal level, what is your experience being in a white dominant society? So how do you see, what kind of challenges you face as a young Black Muslim woman there?
I mean, so I think wanted to actually link into the context in the UK as to like where Black Lives Matter in the UK actually came from. I think there was in 2013 when those protests started in the UK. I mean, those protests actually like echoed around the world, but actually, like Black Lives Matter in the UK was founded in 2015, and it was on the back of the fact that there was this myth that I guess essentially like there is racism in the US and that's where it's secluded, and there's no black brutality here in the UK. And so a group of people got together and put together Black Lives Matter, and actually really highlighted the number of deaths that there's been under police custody here in the UK, taking into account there's countless stories of how police have brutally killed black people here in the UK, and yes, like in the UK the police don't own guns, and therefore you can imagine how much brutal death is going to be when black people are being beaten to death when they're being arrested. I mean, there's a case that to me always really I guess brings home, and it's so similar to George Floyd's death, and it was the case of Sean Rigg, who died by a police officer, who was killed by a police officer in very much the same way that George Floyd died over 20 years ago. And his very last words was the exact same thing: "I can't breathe." And so for me, it's incredibly important for people to realize that just because something is prevalent in the other side of the world doesn't mean it's not happening on your front door. I think that's incredibly important for people to realize. And so I guess shooting back to my experience as a Black Muslim woman, I think it goes without saying that being a visibly Muslim woman, first of all, wearing a headscarf already makes me a target for a lot of different reasons. And again, for the same thing of the color of my skin is something that I can't hide. It's evident and so there's a spectrum of racism, right? There's the covert racism that I face as I navigate through political spaces, as I navigate through society as a whole, and then again there is the very overt racism that I face as a person with a public platform who speaks out on things, and being unapologetically a Black Muslim woman does come with that risk. It comes constantly with that risk. I mean, my social media is often flooded with racists and xenophobes threatening me to take that they'll take my life and I should be sent back home and and so like, and to a certain extent there is this expectation and often like faced by like very well-meaning people that I am a strong Black woman and I'm able to handle that. And I think that in itself, that mentality that that my pain or my struggle can be bared because of the color of my skin in itself is racism. And so I think there's a wider conversation that needs to happen behind like overt racism as well as covert racism. I think for me, I've gotten to a place, especially where I'm now not excusing it, but I now could not care less for any direct racism that I face on my social media, or like essentially white supremacists that hate me and my existence. I couldn't care less. But what I do care about is the covert racism, the individuals that don't think they're racist and think they're doing me a favor by telling me that I am articulate, for example, because I'm a Black woman. And so I think those are wide structural issues that need to be addressed within organizations, within how like we address issues. But for me, like there are wider things. Like when we talk about, for example, for me, like I essentially am an education expert, and like when you look at the education system in the UK, it was less than 100 years ago that universities was exclusively white middle class white men that studied there. That's it. And so now the universities want to, and the education sector as a whole, the university minister and the governments want to praise how we have one of the best education systems in the world, and how like the education system itself has been renounced and has been replicated in many countries like Pakistan, who have set up universities, or very much set up in the same establishment in the UK. But actually, those spaces were never made for Black and brown people to study. And so, and I mean, let alone Black and brown people, that were never made for women to study in. And so, like, you can't replicate a system that was built on colonial mentality, because essentially that structure was never meant for us to progress in. And so it comes really from like really addressing them and tearing them down, and really understanding what a society or even like an education system that is fit for the 21st century looks like, because like there are countless and horror stories that I've heard of Black students who have faced endemic racism in their education system, through their education systems, from their academics, and I mean, there's a reason as to like why universities in the UK, there's Black professors make up less than 1% of thousands of professors, and the reason for that is because like that process is made incredibly difficult and impossible for them. And so, yeah, I think it really goes wider than like a personal experience and a personal story.
Oh well, I mean, as someone, I already mentioned that living in a unipolar society, I can't even imagine the kind of challenge you ladies are facing and coping up with a society where you face discrimination at different levels. So, Jannette. Yes, this is a great movement that people stand up for the rights of Black peoples. But my question, and I've seen a lot of debate on social media, is that why just Black Lives Matter? I mean, why not being inclusive and include everyone who has been discriminated at any level, be it religion or color or geography? Why just one component of racism?
Well, because it's Black bodies that are being taken. It's Black people who are being killed by police. It's Black people who are being killed by white people in the US and in other countries. Here in the United States, we've just had 5 adult Black people who were lynched, like hung by trees within the last week. I don't know if you guys have seen that in the news. Historically, this country has oppressed Black people. Originally, there wasn't a police force. There were white men who would go out in the middle of the night and capture slaves and bring them back to plantations. That evolved into a police force. You have, it frustrates me when people say it should be inclusive. It's not inclusive because the police aren't killing white people at the same rate that they're killing Black people. Black people are, when you look at mass incarceration in the United States, Black and brown bodies are filling those prisons. You don't see white people being basically ripped from
Doesn't that mean there are people who are committing more crimes? That's why they're into the jails?
No, it does not. It does not. That's the thing. So I think people believe, because of the stereotypes that are like just permeating through media, that Black people are out here committing crimes, doing drugs, not taking care of their families. Again, I cannot stress this enough. It's systemic racism. Back in the 60s and 70s, a Black family could not get any type of government assistance whatsoever if the father was living in the home with the family. So what had to happen? The father had to leave the family in order for that family to get any type of food assistance or assistance with utilities or rent or anything like that. The Black family was torn apart. You don't have any race in the United States that's ever had to deal with systemic oppression to the point where their family unit was threatened, their relationship with their husband was threatened. You have to be separate in order to get any type of government assistance. There are so many Black and brown bodies in prison right now for crimes that they never even committed. You saw recently with the Central Park, the lady who was going to call the police on the guy who was bird watching. She immediately fell to the ground. She starts screaming, "Oh my God, there's a Black man. He's threatening me and my dog," when she's choking the dog herself, right? So Black people are always accused of things that they didn't do. And it's very often people believe that you can't go to jail for something you didn't do. Black people go to jail for things they didn't do all the time. There's a man named Brian Stevens who actually fights to get people off of death row who've been wrongly convicted or accused of a crime that they didn't commit. This happened. I personally know people who have been accused of crimes and taken to jail, taken to prison. And if you don't have the resources for an attorney, you basically become another number. So we can't say all lives matter. We can't be all inclusive because all lives aren't being threatened by the police. right? What happened to George Floyd would never happen to one of my white friends. It just wouldn't happen. Period. It would not happen. And if it did happen, like it'd be very rare. But this happens to Black people all the time. You can go back to slave time. You can go back to Emmett Till. There are so many, like Philando Castile, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray. Like we can name all these Black bodies that have been taken over time. I get it when people say all lives matter. That's great, but we're not talking about all lives, because it's not all lives that are being taken by the police. It's not all lives that are being taken by white people in the middle of the street. You have a man jogging in Georgia, Arbery, right? He's just jogging down the street and literally is hunted down. He's hit by a truck and then shot as he's trying to flee. White men who are chasing him in a truck. So yeah, you can say all lives matter, but we know that if all lives matter, then Black lives would matter, right? If all lives matter, then Black lives should matter.
Yeah.
Yes.
But our lives don't matter. Our lives don't matter. And to me, it's frustrating because I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. We recently had one of our young activists was shot and killed by a white man in a Trump shirt. And they decided to not press charges. And this man fled and went to California, right? So now we have a young man, I think he was 22 years old, who's dead because he was trying to wrestle a gun out of this man's hand, the guy was having an altercation with protesters. And that is constantly what African-Americans, what we see in this country. Our bodies are taken, people shoot us, they hang us, these things happen, and we're expected to just get over it. How can you get over Trayvon Martin being murdered by George Zimmerman? How can you get over Tamir Rice being shot dead, a 12-year-old? If those kids were white, that would not have happened. And the reason it's Black Lives Matter is because I'm going to tell you this. I actually gave a speech at KU maybe a year or two ago. And someone asked me about Colin Kaepernick. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, he never said anything about the anthem. He said he was kneeling because he was tired of seeing Black men murdered on video, right? That's why Colin Kaepernick was protesting. He didn't want to see Black men murdered. He wanted something to be done about it. And so I posed a question to all these people, there were about 700 people in the room. And I said, I need to know why you're so offended by someone standing up against racism when it comes to a person being murdered on video. Yeah. If, for instance, there were police officers who were shooting German Shepherds in the middle of the street, right? They're shooting German Shepherds in the middle of the street and it's on video. Every white person in America would be calling PETA. They would be lobbying. They would be reaching out to senators and Congress. We need to change legislation. We need to do this. We need better policies. We can't have these dogs being murdered. But you can sit back and allow a Black man or a Black woman to be murdered on video, fleeing, running away from someone, being shot in the back, and that's okay. So it's not about all lives matter, because if all lives matter, then Black lives would matter.
Absolutely.
All lives aren't being threatened. Black lives are being threatened.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to recognize as well, like that argument of like, well, Black people are being arrested and are committing more crimes is actually a false argument. If you think about the way in which policing is actually thought out, right? At the end of the day, if there are far more police in Black communities, then there are going to be more arrests, right? What people don't realize is that police are actually often given targets of how many arrests they should make and what they should be working towards. But if there's one police officer working in like a community of white people, and there's like 50 targeted in the Black community, there are going to be more arrests. And actually, if there's one thing we know is that Black people are far more likely to get, are 3 times more likely to get the sentence that of their white counterparts for the exact same crime, the exact same situation, could be the exact same city. And so, like, at the end of the day, like as long as the color of my skin is posed as a threat, then we can't talk about all lives matter, because the reality is white skin isn't synonymous to being a threat. And so I think that's an argument that's just been used for years to shut down conversation, and it's very much the white supremacist ideology.
And a lot of, I think the challenge with that, the reason, and I'm speaking about white people that I know, people who I've been friends with for over 20 years, the reason that people are so bothered by the statement Black Lives Matter is because when you say that as a white person and you hear that, you have to admit that there is a racist system at play. You have to admit that for years, you didn't do anything to stop that racist system that has oppressed Black and brown people in this country. You have to admit that there is a police force that is being paid by tax dollars, and those people are out murdering people in the streets. Now, not all police are bad. We know that, right? Not all police are bad, but I think there are enough bad police officers to where it needs like, there needs to be an overhaul, and there needs to be police reform, and there needs to be a true focus on racism within that system.
Absolutely.
I hear continuously pain and suffering while you ladies speak about Black Lives Matter. Zamzam, asking you, what makes you so strong? I mean, you are an activist who goes on street, and Jannette, I had also just heard offline conversation that you were talking about tomorrow you're traveling to attend your family, and then the next day you are going to, do some activism against the police shooting. And every day you ladies are, facing and fighting against this discrimination. So what is your source of motivation? What motivates you? What is your inspiration in all this darkness?
I think like for me, like the personal is political. Like I don't have a choice at the end of the day. Like I am a Black Muslim woman, and like for me to stay quiet as my brothers and sisters are dying, and it could be me next. It could be my brother. And so I think there's at the end of the day, like I think for me as just as regardless of like, apart from like anything that I've ever done in my life, in terms of the roles that I hold and the public speaking that I do, I think I'm either a part of the problem by staying quiet, and even being a Black woman, staying quiet. I'm essentially allowing this system to progress and continue on, or I take a stance and I make change, and I do what I can for as long as I possibly can. And I think for me, like there's only so much that you can, because like the whole point of the whole concept behind activism comes from like taking action, right? It's something, seeing some form of social injustice that you see in society, and wanting to change that. And I think actually like being a Muslim, first and foremost, like it's a part of my faith to tackle injustices in any way that I see it. And I think that's incredibly important, being a Muslim and being tackled that. And a part of that is actually like tackling racism within the Muslim community, because that is prevalent. Like one of the things that we have to address as a Muslim community is that the shop that called the police on George Floyd was an Arab shop. And those were Muslims. And I think there is an anti-Blackness that exists within the Muslim community specifically that needs to be spoken about, that needs to be tackled. And so I think there are some very uncomfortable conversations that need to happen within our community, outside of our community. But you can't make change without actually being able to highlight that and lobby that further.
Interesting. Jannette, do you think, is there going to be any end? Are you going to reach to any, solution or conclusion, all these efforts and movements, being an activist? So what is that source of belief or inspiration for you as an activist, that what end you see in your lifetime or in the lifespan of your generation, where all this is going?
Right. So for me, this is the first time ever, like right now, this very moment, is the first time that I've ever felt like there could possibly be change. And I think it's only because the entire world has seen what happened with George Floyd, right? The entire world was outraged. I think the entire world has been exposed to like this ugly underbelly of what America, the capitalist society, the racist society, the oppressive structure of America. I think now that that's been exposed, I do believe that there is a possibility of change. So you see people fighting to defund some parts of the police department. You see police reform on the table, something that I'm going to discuss with a group next week. For me personally, you can't sit back and watch people who look like you be murdered and not say anything. Those are my family members. When I saw George Floyd, even though he's only 2 years younger than I am, I saw my son. When he called out for his mother, I literally dropped my phone. I was watching the video and I'm like, what is this? And I literally dropped the phone because he started screaming for his mother. And just, I knew at that time what was going to happen. And it broke my heart. It honestly, it broke my soul. I couldn't even talk to my friends. I had a lot of my white friends and professional friends checking on me. And it was like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to hear it, because you see the same thing that I see. And when it initially came out, before all the extra video came out, people were like, well, he should have not resisted. How is he resisting with somebody on his neck? And so as a Black person in this country, I think I would be doing a disservice to people who look like me, people in my own family, if I didn't speak out against it. I would be doing a disservice to myself and my daughter and just people who I love and I care about if I didn't take the opportunity to speak out on any platform or to work to try to change these systems. When I know that I have access, I have some power because of my professional background, I would be a fool not to try to take advantage of that and try to impact change. If not, all we're going to do is keep seeing Black people being murdered in this country. It'll still continue. And this is just the beginning. We're talking about Black Lives Matter because we are seeing Black bodies being taken, but we're also seeing Black bodies being taken with mass incarceration. And I know that that's a conversation for another day. But it just speaks to like the systemic oppression in America and how Zamzam was talking about earlier. You have to change policy. You have to get these laws changed, which are rooted in racism. They're rooted and created for white people to thrive, basically. And a lot of white people, they don't know that. It's not their experience. When you have white privilege, you don't recognize it. You just have it. And for me, one of my favorite books of all time is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I think every person should read that book. It gives you
again.
It's White Fragility. I'm actually going to give you a book list to share with everyone later. Some of my favorite.
That would be great.
Yeah, but it just talks about how systemically racism is embedded into all these systems. And as a white person, if you don't even acknowledge that, then you are basically supporting racism on a structural level. So as a Black person in this country, if you don't speak up and stand out, you'll be next. I feel that all the time. So.
Interesting. While listening to both of you, there's one common factor which I could just observe over here. Is that you ladies made a conscious choice not to detach yourself from the issue, and you thought that could be my issue, or I could be at that place next time, or as you said that when you heard about George Floyd, you thought it's my son, and as Zamzam said that whenever I hear in the news, I think about myself, I think about my brother, I think about my family members. That's where as an activist, I'm seeing that you are deriving your aspiration to be part of that problem, and that's where you see that that's your problem. Now, in this context, while we have a lot of young people from Pakistan who are listening to this conversation, how would you advise to a young person who is living on the other part of the globe, who does not feel this issue as a very urgent or important issue in their life because they have their own issues to handle? So how they can sensitize themselves to issues like racism, discrimination? So what should be a young person in other part of the world can do to support this movement?
Well, for me, I just think that I think an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. I think Martin Luther King said that. The issue is that just because it's not your experience as a young Pakistani youth, it doesn't mean that it's not going to impact you in some way. Like Zamzam's dealing with like xenophobia and whatnot in the UK, right? That could very well happen to a Pakistani youth visiting the UK or visiting the United States who's not aware of the racist structure in the systems here. I think that I think it's important for young people to get involved with organizations like Black Lives Matter and other nonprofits also, just because if you want this to be a better world for yourself and for the children you may or may not have in the future, you have to be involved, and you have to make sure that the old way of thinking, that there's a shift in those, like the systems of oppression. We see it all the time. here in the U.S., it started with slavery, and then it went on to mass incarceration. And you have Black people who go to jail and they're in prison for things that white people are now getting paid for, right? Like with the cannabis industry, right? For years, Black people went to prison for 20, 30, 40 years for selling weed, and now white people are making millions of dollars from it. Those same systems can permeate if it's in Pakistan, if it's in the UK. So it's important for young people to get involved, because it may look differently when it comes to Pakistan, but you need to be able to identify those systems of oppression and figure out how you are not going to be supporting those systems of oppression, whether it's your privilege, whether it's your family money, whether it's the color of your skin. As a young Pakistani youth, how are you going to just take a stand for people who may not have as much power or influence that you may have? I think it's important.
Interesting. Zamzam, any advice for young people on how they can sensitize themselves to the issues across the globe?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, in terms of like seeing these videos, I think for me, like, we have to really ask ourselves a simple question. If you are watching the death of George Floyd and you felt nothing, you didn't feel anger, you wasn't upset, then I think then there needs to be a further question as to why is the pain and the suffering and the death of a Black life really not draw up an emotion for you. And I think that's a question on. Often we talk about like humanity and us being humane, but actually, like, why is it that the death of an animal often infuriates some people more than the death of a human being, just because the color of their skin happens to be Black? And I think that is a question that we need to be asked. But more importantly, I think like Jannette has said, like, systemic racism like will affect us all, regardless of whether you're Black or brown, regardless of whether you live in the UK or you live in Pakistan. And so, like, there's I think there's an understanding of how racism affects different people in society. And the reason that I work behind the Black Lives Matter work is because Black people have always been at the bottom of that peg, right? Racism, like, I've often had conversations with loads of people, especially like students from like Pakistan and India, who've asked me quite genuinely, being like, well, why can't we talk about the racism that I face in the UK? Like, why isn't that part of the struggle? And like, to a certain extent, it absolutely is, because the Black Lives Matter work, like, will like, if we change those policies, that is policies that's going to affect all of us. That's going to liberate all of us, regardless of whether you're Black or whether you're brown in the UK. But actually, like, the pain and the struggle and the issues affect Black people disproportionately, and that's where we're focusing our fight. And we're a part of that fight. And I think I think for any activist that lives in Pakistan right now that wants to be able to do something, or even like doesn't know what role they play, they can raise awareness of the issue locally. They can set up a group, a society in their university, in their college, in whatever, in the youth group, wherever they organize, and like actually start to recognize some of the systemic issues that Black people face in Pakistan, because there are Black people living in Pakistan who often face discrimination in Pakistan itself. And so I think it really starts with like calling that out and understanding how you can make a change in your country, but also show solidarity with what's happening in the US and what support you can put out there. Because I think one of the things that people don't realize is how important international solidarity is, how important it is for the rest of the pressure that you put on governments when thousands and thousands of people are mass mobilizing in countries around the world, and what that really does to the government. It makes them really listen, because if they don't make their changes, it quite literally embarrasses them to the rest of the other governments. So I think there is international solidarity is incredibly important, like going out and protesting, even for an issue that's on the other side of the world, does enact change, and that's incredibly important.
And honestly, I attended the Women's March when Trump was elected as president. I went to the Women's March, and I didn't go because I was a Black person and I knew, that we needed to fight racism. Like, racism has always been in America. I went because I was so offended by just how egregious the things he was saying and doing about Black people, about Muslims, about gay people. I felt like I needed to go to that protest in DC to take a stance for people who couldn't go, and to stand up for all people, not just Black people in that moment. because we had elected a president who was like blatantly just you know, he was racist, he was a xenophobe, he was saying all these sexist things. And I felt like we, as a person, as a human, I needed to take a stance, not as a Black person, but as a human who, you know, I have, I'm Black, so like I'm affected by racism. I have gay friends, I have gay family members, I have immigrant friends, I have refugee friends. And for me, it's important to take a stand for other people, because one day you will need those people to take a stand for you. That one day for me is right now, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with police brutality and people being killed. There was a question that someone asked about the police basically having immunity, and how we need to fight that. The issue is with the police unions. The police unions, that's a whole nother beast. Like the police union has so much power, and it protects the police officer and not the people. And so with the issues of defunding, you have a lot of police unions who are threatening mayors and threatening people in government, because they do have a lot of power. But how can you give immunity to someone? And that's the thing with these protests that have happened the last couple of weeks. People are saying, oh, but they're looting and they're rioting. And there was a meme I saw that said, you will sit here and you will talk about the most violent people in this protest, right? So you'll pick the little 5% of people who are being violent, but you won't focus your energy on the violent people in the police department. And so I think we just really need to be honest and have some honest conversations about what's happening with the police department and racism in general in these countries.
100%. I mean,
you just talked about these riots and looting and robberies. I mean, we have seen the clips on social media, and they're pretty, disgusting and discouraging to see. And a lot of people in our part of the world, they're saying that, look at the protesters. I mean, this is what the people do on the streets when you rights to protest.
Those are white people protesting. Those are white people burning buildings and breaking windows. I will send you plenty of videos. Those are not Black people. And let's be clear, anytime you have a movement and people are doing something righteous, you will always have somebody from the opposing side who will come in under this false guise that they're part of this movement, wearing their Black mask and covered up. There was a police officer who had broken into like an AutoZone or something.
Yeah,
I think it's so. For people to say, oh, they're looting, they're rioting, no, the hell they aren't. Those are white people doing that. There have been videos, and I will send them to you, of Black people telling the white people, don't come in our community and do this. This is not what we're about. We are protesting for Black lives that really matter. You are trying to incite a riot.
But also, like, I think what like how can people see that that a police officer that's taking lives isn't being highlighted in the same way of a few shop windows being broken? Like, how is that more important? How is that more valuable? And to me, that frustrates me. And how can't people see through that? Like, who cares about a couple of shop windows that have been broken, where a life cannot be replaced? That life is gone.
And being honest, that there are other things to take into consideration. Those items, the stores that are being broken into or burned or whatever, what have you, they have insurance. They'll be fine, right? George Floyd, you're not going to be able to bring him back to life. Like, that's impossible. So if you can figure that out, you let me know, and then I'll personally go out and stop people from burning buildings at that point. But some of these people they're not a part of this movement. They're doing it because they know that if you can turn the people against, I mean, Malcolm X said it, if you want to assassinate somebody, all you have to do is assassinate their character. If you can make an organization look like they're out here looting and there's anarchy and destruction, it's easily to tear that organization apart.
Yeah.
But I will send you videos. Those aren't Black people doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, yeah, definitely. We do see the other side of it as well. But this is important to understand that, what is the most important thing for you, the human life or the property or the material things. When it comes to the comparison, it's always human life that has to be given a priority. Right, ladies, we are heading towards the last 7 minutes of this conversation. So I think our audience are also learning a lot. So do you guys have any quick tips or any tools, the way young people across the world, especially in Pakistan, can educate more themselves about these global issues, and how a common person can avoid the racist attitude? What are those keywords? What are those behaviors which we need to be careful about demonstrating in our day-to-day life? So any quick tips or freebies for our audience?
Yeah, for me, oh, go ahead, Zamzam. Sorry.
Oh, no, sure. So I think we more or less highlighted, I guess, in some of the advice that we gave earlier. And I think the one thing that everyone has the ability to do is to do some reading. And there's a lot of resources that are available for free on the internet. I can send you a reading list. And like what you can do is you can donate money to these campaigns, these causes that are currently happening. And like organize, like bring people together and campaign wherever you can. And I think like the more we the more we connect together and the more we work together in highlighting the issues that exist around the world, the better it is for all of us. And I think so. Like the most important thing, and where you start with any form of action is you educate yourself, and only then, when you educate yourself, can you educate others? Can you empower others? Can you really call out systemic racism?
Interesting. So educating others and getting being connected and being educated yourself. I think that's what Zamzam said. And Zamzam, we had a great compliment for your name. There was an admirer who wanted to say that you've got a beautiful name. So quickly, what's the meaning of this name?
Zamzam. So yeah. I mean, any Muslim would know there's a story behind Zamzam water. In Mecca, there's a well, a holy blessing of water called Zamzam. And I would Google it. It's a bit of a long story, but it essentially means holy water.
Yeah, it's a holy water. Thank you very much for sharing that. Right, Jannette. So, what would you advise to the young people of the world?
Pretty much the same thing. I mean, there are a lot of resources available, especially you were talking about technology earlier. There are ways to support organizations globally, whether it's through a donation, whether it's through on the ground work. There's so many ways to get involved in activism now, especially with social media. I think that what really touched my heart was seeing globally all the people who, after what happened to George Floyd, started, sort of floating through the world. People who were protesting all over. People who, in the UK, they were taking down racist statues, the same as they were doing here in the US. So I think that there are ways for young people to get involved if they want to protest on a local level. If they want to advocate for policy change, they can do that. I think there are strength in numbers. So the more people supporting a cause, the more likely it is to change. And it's just a matter of like reaching out and trying to get involved. I read a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram Kendi, maybe last year or so. And that book made me see things that I myself was doing that had racist sort of undertones to it because of things that I have access to in America, with my education and my profession. So I think that just educating yourself constantly on with resources that are available about racism, about systemic oppression, it'll help you be an advocate to stop it. So.
Yeah, interesting. As I started in the beginning, that we are in 21st century, and with so much technological advancement and human exploring the universe and the education, the research, and the connectivity. But this is sad to see that still, as a human being, we are struggling with these basic issues. The human life is being degraded by the issues like racism, xenophobia, and discrimination. And that's what our speakers, our honorable guests from UK and US were trying to educate the young people around the globe. That if we become sensitive enough, if we start considering that any issue that affects a human life that's related to me, and if we stop detaching ourselves to these global issues and we start showing the concern, and at least what we can do, we can do a small post on Twitter or on social media to show that we are with this we are with our fellow humans, no matter what continent, what country they live. And as our speakers, our guests said there, that this is the time where the young people need to educate themselves. It's a time where we need to go and watch YouTube, do some Google to see the issues and elements. And then we can create our own movements. We have seen these young people sitting in front of us. I mean, they just decided, they made these conscious decisions that this issue of Black Lives Matter is their issue, and then they have to speak up and they have to stand up to raise their voice, to act against discrimination. And that's the whole message behind this session today, which is ACT, a global act, where the people all around the world. And I'm so grateful to Jannette for taking out your time. I know you were traveling, and right now you just arrived in the hotel, and you this 1 hour for the young people of Pakistan and across the globe to educate them. And Zamzam, thank you very much again for your valuable insights. And I'm sure a lot of young girls, especially I would say young Muslim girls, need to get inspiration from what you have been trying to do in UK. So great salute to both of you ladies, and thank you very much. Have a good day, good evening. Take good care of yourself.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Zamzam.
Bye.
Thank you.